Quasar's scroll observer component is really cool and super simple to get started with. If we come in here and say Q-scroll-observer, that's all we have to do to actually use it. Then we say at scroll is equal to, and then let's say on scroll here, we'll come down here and say setup, and then we'll do a return here and then say on scroll or const on scroll is equal to, we'll accept the dimensions, and then we'll console.log them. There we go. In fact, how about to keep this flexible, we change that to ... params, and we just spit out all of the params. This is a really cool technique if you want to basically console.log everything available. And then we can basically expose this here, save it, and now check it out. Well, I can't actually scroll up and down this page. So let's come up here, might get rid of that and change it to padding, and then set style with a height equal to 200 view height. And there we go. Now we'll be able to scroll down the page. And we get a console.log here. Let's take a little look at what's available to us. So a lot of this is obvious. We've got the direction we scrolled in, whether or not the direction changed. So if we change between up and down, we've got the position, but the one that might be confusing to you is delta here. And delta is basically how far you have scrolled since the last event. So rather than logging every single pixel event that you scroll, basically the Chrome browser or whatever browser you're using is going to tell you how far you've scrolled. Because if it logs every single pixel, then it's going to be ridiculously slow. It's going to slow down the browser. And that's why we get this delta. And I'll give you an example of this. So let's make this a bit bigger. If I scroll really fast to the bottom, and then we open up one of these, that delta is going to be a large number because the last position that it recorded was far away since we scrolled down so quickly. But if I do this really slowly, and then I open one of these, that delta is going to be a much smaller number on all of those scrolls. This is particularly handy in some situations. In fact, delta is worth looking into if you want to have draggable things. When you want to have draggable stuff on the page, that's where delta tends to come in handy. You probably won't actually use it much in terms of scrolling. But anyway, moving on. Quasar's scroll observer is quite smart by default. So at the moment, it's attaching to the entire page. But what it does is it searches for something else that it can scroll on. And if it finds that thing, then it's going to attach itself to that thing to scroll on. I'll show you what I mean. Let's have a div here. And then if we set a class equal to scroll, and then give it something like overflow-hidden, and then how about we set, for example, a max width or a width of 200 pixels, and then a height equal to 300 pixels. And then I might give this a background color as well so it's easier to see. Background-gray-2. Save it. And if we scroll up now, and there's the div that we just created. Now, if I put inside of there, and I might just comment out this observable for now. If we put inside of there another div that is going to hold some text. So for example, v-4 will say I in 15, basically to spit something out 15 times. And then we'll set the key equal to I. Then throw some lorem ipsum in there. Save it. And there we go. Now we've basically got this scrollable div. Actually, let's change this to overflow auto. Yeah, that'll fix that up. Now we can scroll up and down this div. So now, if we put this QScrollObserver inside of that div, it's going to notice this scroll class and attach to this div instead of the whole page. So check this out. If I try and scroll up and down, onScroll is not getting called. But if I scroll up and down inside of this div, it does get called. How cool is that? So QScrollObserver is basically smart enough to find the thing that it's supposed to be observing. But it gets better than that. We can also be more specific. So if I come down here and make another div, and then let's just copy what we've got for this div here. And then what I might also do, let's throw that lorem ipsum in there. So these will be pretty much identical for demonstration purposes. Save that. Now we've got another div underneath here. So I might just come down here to close that out. Now, of course, if we scroll up and down here, we get the console log. If I scroll up and down in the second one, we don't. And that's exactly what you would expect. However, now what I can do is say scroll-target is equal to my-scroller. And let's make that an ID by putting the hash symbol in there. Now, if I put an ID on here equal to my-scroller, what's going to happen is the scroll observer is going to watch this div instead, which is really cool. It means that if you're inside of a component and you want to look for scrolling somewhere else in your application, you can do that using the scroll target. Check this out. Now when I scroll up and down here, we don't get any console logs. But if I scroll up and down here, we do get console logs. So basically this scroll observer can be anywhere in your application, and you can tell it to observe something that's sitting somewhere else on the page. Really, really cool if you need that flexibility. All right, and there's an order of operations going on here. First, it checks for the scroll target. If it's got a scroll target, it's basically just going to grab that scroll target and choose it. If it doesn't have a scroll target, so let's get rid of that and save it, it's going to go up the chain and try and find a div that's got scroll written on it. And not just scroll, also the necessary overflow class. So if I save that, now it's ignored on here and it works on here. Now if we don't have that div, so if it can't find a div with scroll and those overflow classes on it, so let's get rid of that, and we might remove this other div as well now. Save that. Oh, make sure we get rid of all of this. There we go. So if we go back to that basic example, it's now going to work on the entire page. So once again, it's saying, hey, do I have a scroll target? No, I don't. What's the next thing? Do I have a parent with a scroll class, any of the scroll classes? If I don't, then I'm just going to attach to the whole page. So that's how the order of operations work. Scroll target, check for parent classes, otherwise attach to the entire page. Now let's do some undoing here, and I'll show you what else we can do. Save that, so we're back to this example. We can also say here scroll-y. That's another class that it will look for. So that's still going to work as well. Overflow auto. So let's just leave that on overflow auto. That's going to work as well. And another thing we can do is add a debouncer. So if I come in here and say debounce, this is especially useful if you've got something that's taking up a lot of resources. So if you scroll down this and then a large action occurs, something that's really resource intensive, you might want to add a debouncer on. So let's set that to something like 2000, which means 2 seconds, so 2000 milliseconds. Now, if I scroll around here, it's got that 2-second debouncer. So that's good to know as well. Another thing we can do is change the axis. And this is best showed if we wrap this div inside of another div. So let's wrap it in another div like this. And I'm going to take these classes here, these styles and that class, and whack it on that div. All right, I'll show you what I'm doing here in a second. Get rid of those classes. And so now it's going to attach to this div up here because it's got the overflow auto class. And then this one here that's got the style, I'm going to set a width equal to 400 pixels. All right, so notice that we can do an X scroll here now and a Y scroll. So by default, it's only going to watch for scrolls on the Y axis. So that works. X axis doesn't work. What we can do though is come in here and say axis is equal to horizontal. Save it. And now when I go from side to side, it works, but then vertical does not work. You can also say here both. And that means, of course, that it's going to work on both horizontal and vertical. So that's good to know. And to wrap up this video, I just want to point out that the layout itself also has the ability for watching for scrolling. So if you just want to watch for a scroll on the entire layout, you might not need all of this extra overhead. I'll show you what I mean. Let's close all of this out. Get rid of that. We'll get rid of everything inside of this page. Just put a comment there. There we go. Now scrolling up in the page is no longer going to call this on scroll here. Now let's jump into main layout. And then what I can do here is say at scroll. So the layout component has this special at scroll event. And then we can say on scroll. Now I'll copy that, come down here. There we go to our setup. And then we can say const on scroll is equal to a function param. So we'll take all of those params and let's console.log those params. Copy it, paste it in there, and then we'll expose that on the template here. There we go. Now notice that when I scroll up and down the page, we now get some scrolling data available to us. So that's good to know. If you're just looking for a scroll event on the layout, you might want to just directly say, hey, layout, have you scrolled or haven't you? That might be a little bit simpler for your use case. And one last thing, if I come down here and jump back into index, actually before we do that, let's come down and comment that out or remove it entirely. Remove that, come up here and remove that. Otherwise, it's going to mess with our next example. If we jump into index.view and then we Control Z until we're back to that other example that we had, save it. Right, so we have no observer attached to this scroller. Another way that we can look for scrolling is say v-scroll and then on scroll. So we have this v-scroll directive that you might want to use instead of using the QScrollObserver component. Now let's come down here. That's already exposed on the component, so we'll save it, refresh the page, and let's check if this works. And there you go. You've got a little bit less data, but that's good to know that you can just use this directive if it suits your needs. So there we go. That's the scroll observer component. Hope you enjoyed this one. See you in the next video.